Okay. Okay, meeting's ready to adjourn. The date? Yes, it is June 18th, 2024. And we have somebody to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Lead us. Everybody stand, please. So, going to have roll call, please.
Sure. Commissioner Sherman,
Yes.
Commissioner Langley, Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Vice Chair Reicher,
Yes.
and Chair Henderson is out today.
Okay. We will have the start at number 2. 1. Okay. Review the meeting online at youtube.com for the city of Gardena. Participants before the meeting by mail, emailing the Gardena Board Commission Committee at public comment at City of Gardena 2 hours before the meeting starts on the day of the meeting and write public comment in the subject line. 2, attending the meeting in person, public comment. The Gardena Board Commission Committee will hear from the public on any item on the agenda or any item of interest that is not on the agenda at the following times. Agenda items. At the time the Board Commission Committee considers the item or during public comment. If you wish to address the Gardena Board Commission Committee, please complete a speaker request form and present it to staff. You will be called upon when it is your turn to address the Board Commission Committee. The Board Commission Committee cannot legally take action on any item not scheduled on the agenda. Such items may be referred for administrative action or scheduled on a future agenda. Members of the public wishing to address the Board Commission Committee will be given 3 minutes to speak. The City of Gardena, in complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, requests individuals who require special accommodations to access, attend, and/or participate in a city meeting due to disability to please contact the city clerk's office by phone 310-217-9565 or email cityclerk@cityofgardena.org at least 24 hours prior to the scheduled general meeting to ensure assistance is provided. Assistive listening devices are available. Standards of behavior that promote civility at all public meetings. Treat everyone courteously. Listen to others respectfully. Exercise self-control. Give open-minded consideration to all viewpoints. Focus on the issues and avoid personalizing debate, and embrace respectful disagreement and dissent as democratic rights, inherent components of an inclusive public process and tools for forging sound decisions. Thank you for your attendance and cooperation. Okay. Approval of minutes for a February 20th, 2030,
there's a-
24 meeting, 20240220, PEQC.PDF. Also, 4B, May 21st, 2024 meeting, 2024 0521 PEQC.PDF. Oral communications. This is the time
So,
with.
sorry, Vice Chair, Right Chair, before we move forward to agenda item number 5, I just want to see if there's any approvals for the minutes listed on here. And I'll just note to the commission and to members of the, here in attendance, the typo on the agenda for agenda items number 4A should read February 20th of 2024 as Vice Chair read.
Yes, does anyone approve?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the February 20th, 2024 minutes of the meeting.
Second?
Second.
Okay.
Commis-
Roll call.
Commissioner Langley,
Yes.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Commissioner Sherman,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Henderson. I'm sorry, Vice Chair Right Chair.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve May 21st, 2024 minutes of the meeting.
Second? Anyone second?
Oh, I thought
Okay,
you were
I second.
Okay. Commissioner Langley,
Yes.
Vice Chair Right Chair,
Yes.
Commissioner Sherman,
Yes.
and Commissioner Khan.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay. Oral communications. This is the time where the public may address the Planning Commission on items that are not on the agenda, but within the Planning Commission's jurisdiction. Comments should be limited to 3 minutes.
So as Vice Chair Right Chair had stated, this is a time for oral communications for participants wanting to speak to the Planning Commission for items not on this agenda. It is limited to 3 minutes, and I believe we have no one from the public wanting to speak to the Planning Commission for items not on this agenda today.
Okay. Public hearing items, 6A. Environmental assessment number 1024, general plan number 1-24, zone change 1-24, and zone text amendment 4-24. The Planning Commission will be considering making a recommendation to the City Council on certification of environmental impact report, EIR, adoption of findings, and statement of overriding considerations, general plan, land use, plan designation changes and text amendments, and zoning changes and zone text amendments. Project description. The project proposes to readopt the amendments to the land use plan of the community development element of the Gardena General Plan and zoning map for the 468 inventory sites identified in the 2021-2029 Gardena housing element. In addition, the project involves adopting the zone changes to eliminate the parking zone on split zone properties, adopting a formal statement regarding the dividing line on other split zone residential properties, and readopting the text changes to Title 18. Environmental determination. An environmental impact report, EIR, was prepared to analyze the impacts of the changes to both the inventory and non-inventory sites, as well as the text amendments to the land use plan and the zoning code. Okay. Where's my, but I don't, the attachment 12, parking split zone properties. Attachment 13, yeah, because,
So it's the, and then you can put here.
oh, because that's not written here. Okay, thank you. The Planning Commission will consider a recommendation to the City Council on certifying the EIR prepared for the City of Gardena General Plan, Zoning Code, and Zoning Map Amendment Project, and adopting a mitigation monitoring and reporting program. All the related documents are open for public review at the Community Development Department and on the city's website. Staff report, PDF, Planning Commissioner draft resolution.
Thank you. So I'll be giving a presentation on the staff report that was
Okay.
prepared for the agenda. So, so as mentioned, tonight's presentation is in regards to agenda item number 6A, and these matters are in relation to the work that was done for the sixth cycle housing element and the sites identified in the city's project for the projected housing growth over the past 8-year period for the 2021 to 2029. I will be giving, again, before getting into the presentation on the report, I do want to note we do have our environmental consultant here who will also be giving a presentation in regards to the impact report that was prepared. But to begin, so as you all know, back in March of 2021, SCAG, which is the region that the city falls under, adopted its sixth cycle housing allocation plan, which allocated to the city of Gardena a regional housing need assessment number of 5,735 units. A number in which I'm sure we're all aware of when presenting this before the commission and the city council for the past several years in relation to the adoption of the housing element. As you know, though, to reiterate, this number was broken down by different income levels and shown here in this table. But again, reminders to the commission and those in attendance that the city's only obligation is in order to plan for that number of units. And so that's what the city has done in its most recent adoption of the housing element. There's not an obligation necessarily for the city to construct that number of units in that period, but we do need to prepare our plans to identify for that housing growth. So if you recall, if you were on the commission at that time, when the project first started, there were several workshops that were brought before the commission and the city council and the public at public hearings to establish a strategy to identify those sites. Here shown, in those studies, the city's strategy was to identify or establish new housing overlays over commercial and industrial areas along the major corridors because, again, the city's lack of available vacant land. So as mentioned, through several workshops and public hearings, again, before the commission and the city council, the city identified which areas to consider for these new overlays and at which density levels. And then fast forward to February of 2023, in order to avoid penalties and loss of grant money, the city adopted the most recent housing element for the sixth cycle, which in part did include identifying those final inventory sites, as mentioned by Vice Chair Wright, the 468 units, 468 parcels to accommodate the city's regional housing need assessment. However, in order to also identify the appropriate number of sites to accommodate for the 5,735 units, the city also included a buffer. So it included additional sites besides those just to accommodate the housing need number received by the state. So again, it's here before you, again, shown through the projects. This buffer is a necessity as if there are identified sites, projects that are being proposed on those sites that are not developed in accordance with the identified numbers. So the housing, the city must compare that in an analysis, also known as the no net loss analysis, that shows that the city still has appropriate number of sites identified. So again, those inventory sites also included those buffers to account for additional housing growth. So going back now, back in before the adoption, because remember we had to get the our housing element in compliance with the state's department. And in part of that, as mentioned, we had to identify the sites and get those rezoned or the overlays established within the city's general plan and zoning maps. So again, that was done back in 2023. However, back in October of 2020, the city entered into a contract with De Novo Planning Group for the preparation of an environmental impact report for the inventory and non-inventory sites, as well as additional textual changes. And so that's what's being brought before you today, the consideration on the recommendation to the City Council. In addition, there are further items being brought tonight to the Planning Commission for consideration. We'll go over those. So under the proposed project for the EIR, the 468 parcels comprising of the inventory sites shown here were studied. And as mentioned, there were additional sites between the around those identified sites in the housing element, known as the non-inventory sites, were also included in the environmental impact report for analysis. And the map shown here are all those sites combined, again, along the major corridors for within the city for identifying for new housing overlays. However, since the time that the analysis first started under the impact report, the proposed changes were originally undertaken and since then the state's legislation has enacted dozens of additional housing bills, placing more and more burdens on local governments. The city's it is noted that the city's sixth cycle allocation did increase about more than 1,400% from the previous cycle, the fifth cycle, going from 397 now again to 5,735. And as well as stated, the city, as it's recommended to allow for a buffer to do no net loss analysis, which the city did do in its housing element update. So the city planned for additional sites than the housing need assessment allocation. So therefore, staff at this time is recommending that the Planning Commission, again, recommend to the City Council to adopt a modification to the inventory sites alternative number 2, that was identified in the EIR. So again, it's a modification to alternative 2, and we'll get into what this modifications by staff's recommendation are. And again, we'll have our consultant go into the complete analysis that was done under the report. Okay. So what this modification under this alternative includes are the first two things are the readoptions of the land use updates and the zoning changes. So that's to the general plan, land use map as shown here, and the zoning map for the new overlays. So part of this alternative will include the readoption of all of those sites. So nothing changing from what is already in place, but the report needs to, this project goes along with the environmental report that was prepared. So again, only to those alternative sites, only to those inventory sites under this alternative would be included. This includes the former Artesia Corridor Specific Plan area. If you recall, this is along the south end of Artesia Boulevard between Western Avenue and Normandy Avenue. The city in 2023 rescinded that and established the zoning districts that aligned with the underlying development. So commercial areas are now zoned commercial. The two sites that were identified in the housing element were rezoned under this area. So that includes the 1610 West Artesia Boulevard, which was brought just recently to the Planning Commission for consideration. That was a CERN project that included 300 units. So those sites were rezoned in that area, as well as the other sites that are located in this former corridor. So under this alternative, we'll also include that project, readoption of that project. Under this alternative, it also will call to readopt all the text amendments. So that's to the city's zoning code. If you recall, we established these new zoning overlays, but again, they were new to the city. So along with that came the text amendments to establish the specific development standards for all the new housing overlays. So that includes development standards such as setbacks, parking requirements, height restrictions. So those will be then readopted under this alternative. Reiterating the changes, because if you recall, by state law, all housing development projects are only subject to those standards within the city's policy documents that are objective. So no longer can we fall to the residential design criterias that have ambiguous requirements. So the city established specific objective design standards, and so those will also be included in readoption. Lastly, so those are the things that are being readopted, things that are already in place that we're just readopting under with the environmental document that was prepared for them. There are a few newer items included under this project and under this alternative that are being modified. One of them is to eliminate all of the parking zone, all of the properties that are split zoned with the parking zone. So the intention back when these sites were adopted with the split zone was to have the parking areas outlined in gray here on the back ends of the commercial properties that abut residential zones. We believe the intent was to provide for a buffer between commercial and residential. However, the development standards established within those commercial zones do require a certain amount of buffer, so setbacks is what they're referred to, and other standards when commercial is abutting residential. So we're, under this modification, staff is recommending that these split zones with the parking layer be removed and that they be rezoned to have all of the commercial zoning designation. The other issue with having a split zone in this way, and as you'll see in other components of the project, is that they're not identified. So we don't know necessarily where the parking zone begins and the commercial zoning district starts or ends within these properties. So I did want to just go over those areas briefly that we are considering, that the Planning Commission is considering for recommendation to the council. This is a commercial site located on the northwest corner of Rosecrans Avenue and Van Ness, where they sports, what is Big Five and DD's Discounted, as well as the Chase Building Bank across the street on Perchie that the city has acquired. South of that, along the south end of Rosecrans Avenue, are various commercial sites, again with the split zone of the parking area. Within this area includes two of the G3 development projects. The first one over on the right side of this photo is the first G3 urban residential development. I believe it's 43 units. And then the second being Walnut Place, where the old, I think Shakey's restaurant was located, over on the left end of this boxed out area. Further, just east of that area, again, further along Rosecrans Avenue, between Van Ness and Gramercy, there are locations as well that are being split zoned. And further down along Rosecrans, there are sites along between, I don't know the exact street corners, but again, having the split zoning designations of commercial and parking. So again, what staff is recommending happen to these parcels is that the gray portion of the properties be removed, and that it all just be read it's similar to those adjacent parcels to this area. But again, they would be subject to the development standards of those zoning designations. So in this map, this is the C3 zone. They would be subject to meeting minimum development standards, including setbacks. Additional sites along Western Avenue. And I believe this is the last area under consideration, is along West 178th Street, just west of Normandy Avenue. Okay. The second new item coming before tonight for consideration also has to do, again, with split zoning. Again, to reiterate, having these properties split zoned makes it difficult for the city to establish what development standards that these properties are subject to when the location of those designations are not identified. So in this case, there are a total of a handful shown in these maps. I'm going to show in 4 separate maps, residential properties that the city has at some time designated 2 zoning districts within each property. But again, the locations of those measurements are not have not been adopted. So again, making further development on these sites difficult, and for staff to implement certain regulations. So I'll go over each one. However, different from the parking zone, where we're just eliminating the P zone and then identifying what the other zoning designation. Residential, it's a little different. So what we're suggesting is, instead of removing one or the other, is to identify the location of the boundary lines. So where does the R1 end and where does the R3 begin? So the first one is at 14903 South Normandy Avenue. This property is currently developed with, it's multifamily, but it is split zoned between the R2, which is a medium density residential zone, and the R4 zoning district. This is a higher density residential zoning district. So what the city staff is recommending is that it be codified into the city's zoning ordinance, or sorry, zoning code, to identify the actual location of the boundary lines between the R3 and the R4. So as included in the draft ordinance that was prepared for tonight, the city is asking, or the staff is recommending, again, that the portions, the boundary between these 2 zoning districts run parallel from the eastern property line of 14831 South Normandy Avenue, which is shown here on the arrowed here on the map. Oh, there it is. So again, the 2 boundary lines, city staff is saying not recommending that the boundaries be right there in line with the property adjacent to the site. So similarly with the other sites, also split zoned without in the residential areas, is the city is recommending the boundary lines, again, to mirror that of the adjacent parcels. So here for 1031 Magnolia Avenue, city staff is saying that the line shall be then parallel to the property line of 15517 South New Hampshire Avenue. Again, for 14616 South Normandy Avenue, where there's a split zone between R3 and R1. City's recommendation that it run parallel to the property just located at 14610, in line with the R3 and the R1. And lastly, the combined lots along the south end of West 139th Street. There are five. Sorry, the fifth one did not get circled in, but it is located here. You can see that a portion of it is in the R1, and then the other portions are located in the R2 zoning districts. Again, the boundary lines are not identified, but what staff is recommending that they be in line with the parcel line that runs along the parcel located at 1317 West 140th Street. And that's up for the consideration of the commission tonight. Other changes in this ordinance than what was adopted previously are just some minor changes in regards to the city's zoning ordinance, some cleanup. We figured take this opportunity to bring before to the commission. Some cleanup language in terms of uses that are somewhat outdated in our code, but just some minor changes, including some cleanup on the previous items that were included in the ordinance. And here, just identifying when certain development standards are applicable to the residential zoning districts. And so at this time, we'll bring up Starla Barker from De Novo Planning Group, who has prepared the environmental impact report to speak on the analysis.
I don't think, is this on? Okay, it is. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here before you tonight. As Amanda mentioned, my name is Starla Barker. I'm with De Novo Planning Group, and I'm going to be talking through the process, the CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, that process, which also resulted in the preparation of an environmental impact report, or EIR. Let me switch the slide. Thank you. So just briefly, you want to go over the CEQA process. We started back in 2023, April, preparing what's called a notice of preparation, letting the public agencies know that the city was going to be preparing an EIR. The notice of preparation was made available for 30-day public review from April 13th to May 19th, in which comments were accepted on the scope of the environmental topical areas that would be addressed in the EIR. We also held a scoping meeting during that 30-day public review period to give an overview of the project that was being proposed and what was going to be analyzed as part of the EIR, and to, again, accept comments on the scope and any sort of comments or questions or issues regarding the environmental topical areas. We then began preparation of the draft EIR. After the draft EIR was prepared, which included technical studies, the draft EIR was made available for a 45-day public review from January 16th through February 29th of 2024. Again, the opportunity for the agencies and the public to review the document, this time including the full environmental review and analysis and technical studies, identifying those potential environmental impacts, which we'll talk about, and giving the opportunity for anyone to provide comments on the draft EIR. Once the 45-day public review period closed, we prepared responses to comments in the final EIR, and then that was made available also for review from the public, and it's on the city's website. And then here this evening before you, as part of Planning Commission, to present the EIR and for consideration, and then it'll go to City Council in July. And then if the EIR is certified and a project is approved, the notice of determination will be filed. So briefly, just what does CEQA require? CEQA does require you consider all phases of a project, from planning, construction, operations, and this is based on the project itself and what information might be available, and including on and off site to the extent known, as well as the evaluation of the change between what is considered baseline or existing conditions and then future project conditions if the whole of that entire project were to be implemented. So you're really looking at what's existing on the ground today compared to what the project is proposing and implementation of that complete development or build out of that project. CEQA does require that if you do identify significant impacts, that those impacts attempt to be mitigated. And so you'll see as part of the EIR that there are mitigation measures included to address that. And then CEQA does also require evaluation of alternatives to a proposed project. So an EIR includes a section of alternatives which looks at a comparative analysis between alternatives and the project. And the purpose of alternatives is to see if there is an alternative that can reduce or eliminate what might be considered a significant unavoidable impact and when compared to the project while still meeting the basic project objectives. And so in terms of what CEQA requires, again, it does require a review of the potential environmental impacts, includes direct and indirect impacts, the short-term construction, long-term operational, cumulative, so looking at if the project developed completely as well as any additional related type projects or growth that it might be anticipated, as well as your growth-inducing impacts in regards to economics, construction of housing, removal of impediments or obstacles that may limit growth, as well as those unavoidable impacts and identifying any unavoidable impacts that could remain despite the fact that mitigation might be implemented. And the purpose of the EIR is to inform the public agency decision makers and the general public of the project's significant environmental effects. So it is a disclosure document providing that information that is subsequent in compliance with the other documents and information that you're reviewing and considering. We do look at ways to identify to avoid or lessen the significant environmental effects. And as I mentioned, it is required to describe to describe a range of reasonable alternatives. And as you can see here, the environmental topical areas that were evaluated in the EIR were fairly extensive. I won't read them all, but it goes from aesthetics, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, land use and planning, noise, population and housing, transportation, utilities and service system. So the EIR does include a separate environmental analysis of each of these topical areas. So specific for the EIR, the findings that we did find that most of the environmental topical areas would either have no impact or a less than significant impact. There were areas that did require mitigation, and those include cultural resources, geology and soils, and noise. And significant and unavoidable impacts were found for air quality. This is specific to project and a cumulative conflict with what's called the AQMP or Air Quality Management Plan. The Air Quality Management Plan does look at ways that you're going to be compliant with thresholds for air quality emissions, and it is based on growth projections and the land use plans. And so in this case, when we're looking at a project that proposed, a substantial amount of housing that could potentially be developed, you can see that, if from an air quality standpoint, we have to consider all of it being developed, not just, the idea that it could be, but let's say if it was fully implemented. And so there was a significant unavoidable impact if all of that occurred, as well as a significant unavoidable impact to public services, specifically parks and recreation. So the EIR, as I mentioned, does consider alternatives. Specifically, we look at a no project existing general plan alternative. This is a requirement of CEQA to look at a no project alternative. In this case, the no project would be continuing status quo under your existing general plan. Second alternative was looked at the proposed project where only the inventory sites would be considered for changes, and therefore looking at potential for housing. The third alternative was also the proposed project, but with fewer non-inventory sites. So it would include all those inventory sites that you've already looked at, but then also some non-inventory sites, but not as many as were identified as part of the project or project description. The EIR is required to identify an environmentally superior alternative. The EIR does identify alternative 3 as environmentally superior to the proposed project, and that is with fewer non-inventory sites. In this case, it did have equal impacts in most of the areas, but it would result in greater impacts to 3 issue areas and then less than significant impacts in some other issue areas. Generally, it meets the project objectives, but to a lesser extent of the project due to the reduction in the residential development potential. And although it would reduce some of the impacts specifically to those that are considered significant unavoidable, like air quality and parks and recreation, it would not avoid those impacts. So a significant unavoidable impact would still remain with that alternative. The city can find another alternative to be environmentally superior, but based on substantial evidence. And as was noted tonight in the presentation, staff is recommending an alternative 2 with modifications. It's important to note that both alternative 2 and 3 are environmentally superior to the project. They're kind of equivalent really in terms of their impacts, with the exception that alternative 2 does have fewer impacts, specifically to those areas, air quality and parks and recreation, that were identified as significant and unavoidable. Alternative 2 does meet the project objectives, but again, to a lesser extent with the reduction in residential development potential. And it is consistent, alternative 2 is consistent with the general plan housing element, and it also is more consistent with the growth projections that have been identified in the regional transportation plan and sustainable communities strategy. The draft EIR, as I mentioned, was made available for public review and comment. It's made available to the public, responsible and trustee agencies, and interested groups and organizations, and it's submitted to the State Clearinghouse, the Office of Planning and Research for review as well. Again, it was made available from January 16th to February 29th, 2024. And we did receive 6 comment letters during the public review period, so you can change it. Listed here, 5 of them were from agencies and 1 was from a resident. And those are included in your document. They're included as part of the final EIR. As part of that, the comment letters, responses to those comments were prepared in response to the environmental points that were raised. None of the comments that were received resulted in information about a new impact or a substantial increase in the severity of an environmental impact that was identified in the draft EIR. No modifications or revisions to the draft EIR were required as a result of the comment letters that were received. And that concludes my portion of the presentation.
And if there are any questions, I just have a few more slides in regards to staff's report and what's being asked of the commission, but we can always, if there's any questions, we can bring back Starla to answer any questions about the environmental impact report. But as presented in staff's report, as mentioned tonight, again, staff's recommendation is for readoption of only those sites inventory sites that are identified in the housing element. But there were some comments received during the preparation of the environmental impact report. So as Starla mentioned, there was a comment from a resident, and so there was a response to that and included in the environmental document. But other comments that staff has received from other property owners or residents in the city that have inquired about potentially having a housing overlay also identified on their properties. And so it was included in staff's report. And so they believe, oh, no. So these sites include, I'll start this, 14948 Crenshaw Boulevard. That's the old Gardena Cinema location. They have two properties, one of the cinema itself and the parking lot. I can bring up maps later. In addition, there was a property at 15122 Crenshaw Boulevard that was identified by the property owner, and a representative has prepared a letter that's been presented to the Planning Commission tonight. Plans, an additional comment letter and conceptual project plans have been brought before the commission tonight and made available in the back for those in attendance looking to view those. 1350 West 139th Street, if you recall, it's one of the sites that a comment letter was received during the environmental impact report. But if you recall, and I doubt in the maps shown before with the split zone, it's one of the split zone properties identified, but has requested for a different type of housing overlay, or sorry, different rezone for the site located again on 139th Street. And the last is 1031 Magnolia Avenue, another split zone residential property. Another common letter inquired by the property owner for a new zoning and land use designation. To continue in regards to public notices, again, in addition to the comments received tonight and provided to the Planning Commission within the packets, notices were sent out to those who provided comments to the city through the environmental document, and to those that properties that were listed inquiring about a housing overlay on the project. And a notice was issued in the Gardena Valley News for again, all the sites identified within the inventory. And so what's being, again, brought before the commission tonight is to adopt a new resolution 1424, recommending that the City Council take action on the following. First would be for a resolution to certify the EAR that's been prepared for the project, adoption and findings of the statement of override, with the alternative to and the modifications that's been presented. And then as well as a resolution for recommending that the City Council readopt the general plan land use changes that were identified in for the site's inventories, and as well as an ordinance readopting those zoning changes and zone text amendments, along with the cleanups and the text changes for the split zone properties and the parking zone properties within that ordinance included as well. So that's the end of staff's presentations. If there's any questions on any of those parts, staff is available. This is a public hearing. So any of those wishing to speak on this matter, staff would ask that they provided 3 minutes to speak on this item.
Does anyone care to speak right now?
Yeah, there's 4 people who want to speak to the Planning Commission about this item. First would be Keith Glassman, followed by Harold Min afterwards. As a reminder, again, you have 3 minutes to speak once you get to the podium.
As a reminder, because there are a number of people who came in late, if anybody wants to speak on this item and they haven't turned in little slip, the slips are in the back table, please fill it out and bring it up to Kevin, and we'll add your name to the list to speak.
Okay. Do you want to come up?
So the first speaker, Kevin?
Keith Glassman, followed by Harold Min.
Good evening. I'm Keith Glassman, and I'm here representing the property owner for 15122 and 15216 Crenshaw. The 15122 was recently purchased, and actually the owner had come into the city to find out, what his zone, which is C3, what are the possibilities, and in a serendipitous way found out that there's a zone change in the works. So I was actually lucky on his part to be able to find that information. So in saying so, I've given the council a copy of a vision of the current property of 15122 Crenshaw Boulevard. Currently, it's a bit of an eyesore. It's just we bought it about maybe this past month with the notion that, it could have potential. And what we'd like to do is have it included in the property in the housing overlay 5 with the, and we want to have it, it's an infill site. It's a site that's basically bookended by, on the property on the street, there's a housing overlay 05 on both sides of the ends of that block. And so this would be actually a perfect opportunity to include some infill sites. I'm not sure what we call them, inventory or non-inventory, but an EIR was done on these, so it is it's on the record as being part of the EIR. So we would appreciate your consideration to include this in the housing element for housing overlay number 5. We think there'd be a huge benefit, if you can see the actual, schematic and design, we would be able to, this would create a catalyst for the rest of the block to be kind of improved. So we feel it's a great opportunity. We just don't want to miss out on it. So if you could, we would appreciate your consideration to include it in this round of zoning changes. I appreciate it. If there's any questions, I don't know if I have any more time, or if I'm allowed to have any questions.
Question. By the plans, I see you want to have a mixed type unit. You want to have apartment buildings and...
The idea is to have ground floor retail,
Right.
which would be a very good attractive. There's a lot of projects, mixed-use projects in the city, and have apartments or units above that would be rentable. So we're looking at that. It would qualify in terms of, there's a minimum of 8 units. We're proposing 5 here, but that was just a schematic run at it. This hasn't been code checked and gone through planning for development standards yet, but it's a possibility we could do 8 units or more on this property, and it would be a perfect fit for the property. It would be a huge, change in the current condition of the property. So, and the owner's excited about doing it. And again, it was just a serendipitous, finding out about what was going on with the city, which is very exciting. And so we're here to hopefully have you include it. So yeah, it would be a mixed-use project.
Another question. So this will be for what type of income for the apartments of the people? Would this be high income, moderate, or low?
I would say it would be moderate.
Commissioner, this is just a concept, so he's not proposing a particular project.
We don't have anything in plan check. This is just conceptual, but I'm guessing it would be a moderate at this point. But it definitely would be an opportunity to change the whole landscape of the street. And we think that once this project is approved, others may go along with it. And that corridor, that Crenshaw corridor, can definitely benefit from it. And, that's why we're excited about it.
So-
Thank you.
Amanda, can I ask a question on this? Clarification, when he talked about the changing of the zoning of that area, the overlay doesn't change the primary commercial. It just
Right.
lays on top
Right.
that up to zone, 5, right? So,
C3 plus 05.
well, no, it's C3 and anything to 05.
Right.
So you could do 01, 02, 03, 04,
No,
05, or
no,
just
no.
05.
So this is, the map here shown here is the site that the speaker is referencing to. If you could see from the map off to the right, there's a site that's been identified on the housing element. for an overlay of HO5. There are minimum development standard or minimum density requirements and maximum density requirements for each level. But if something is set at O5, it's O5. It needs to meet those minimum development standards and the maximum. So, for instance, HO5 allows for a minimum density of 31 units per the acre. It cannot propose any less than 31 units. So if a project comes in, for instance, on this side, as the speakers has mentioned, that would mean a minimum development of 8 units on this site. If anything less, then it would be a different overlay. So HO4, which is the one just below, requires 21 units minimum. So that would probably be around 5 units.
Well, right now, it's a C1, right?
Right now, it's just C3, it's just
C3.
general commercial. You are right in saying that if the overlay, it's not a rezone, it would be an addition of a housing overlay. That's what is being requested by the speaker, is an overlay to be included as part of these amendments, because the environmental report studied it, but the housing element did not include this site. So they're requesting that this site
Be included as an HO5,
Five.
4, or 5.
That's to the request, I believe, the letter provided.
Staff's
HO5.
recommendation, oh, go ahead, finish.
Oh, sorry. So just to reiterate, in the letter that received for this site, it's requested under 31 to 50 from the applicant and who's representing the property owner.
Okay. But if we don't do anything with it, he can come back and request it be changed to the HO5, right? I mean,
That's true, yes.
we're not limited to it, to just having it as C3.
I think what you're reading from the staff report was that anyone can request a mixed-use development through a development agreement with the city. And that's staff's recommendation, so that we retain control over exactly what this commission and what this city council and what the city would like to see at that site.
Okay.
Once you give it an overlay,
Then you're locked in.
there's development standards, right? You have to automatically allow a mixed-use one, 6 stories. But if you like this particular design, which is a mixed use with 1 story of apartments above it, essentially a 2-story building, and you feel that fits along that corridor, that it's, something that mixes with the residential behind it, through a development agreement, you can require that this particular type of development be met. Once you put that overlay zone, you are going to be subject to the minimum development
Okay,
standards.
so if we do nothing, it can still come back to us and we can do whatever.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you actually wanted to apply and do this, we can do that. And you can ensure that there's ample customer parking or visitor parking for the apartments. So.
Okay.
The reason we're here tonight is, of course, there's momentum and there's these changes occurring, so we would appreciate it doing now sooner than later, because, of course, there's additional costs and time, and we feel like it's an opportunity to,
I
presents itself.
understand, but this is not a proposal that's gone
No,
before
this
the
is
city.
totally-
So at that point,
right. We'd have to come back anyway.
yeah. So,
If you did approve of the HO5, we would come back with a project.
but if we do nothing, you could still approve an HO5 if we like the project that's being presented.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you for your consideration.
You bet.
Okay, next is Harold Min and Mala Patel afterwards.
Hi, my name is Harold Min. I currently live on the Marine Avenue corridor. The address is 2806. I bought a single-family house during COVID in hopes of building a duplex or triplex, but I found out the hard way, which was that my house was coded as a commercial, a C3. So, along that corridor right now, it's a conduit where cars just drive to access the freeways. But if you look at the properties on that corridor, they're all single-family houses. And the fact that it's coded as commercial and industrial, it's kind of limiting my ability to, build a duplex or triplex or a multifamily. So, I just wanted to know if you guys can reconsider that corridor to change, well, not necessarily change, but just restudy whether it's a commercial zone or not, or residential, because I want to say a big majority of houses on that corridor are just single-family houses. So, yeah,
You're between Van Ness and Crenshaw
Van Ness and Crenshaw. Yes.
on the south side?
On the south side, yes. 2806 Marine Avenue. And then on the property right next to me, it's a 3-unit complex. I think it was grandfathered in. That's what I'm guessing. And then the prop. Huh? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, on the south side, right across from the Superior Grocer. Yeah. So are you? So what I want to do is I want to build like a duplex or a triplex. Yeah, instead of being limited with the zoning.
If I understand correctly, with zoning, it's a housing, you have a house there presently, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and you're in a commercial zone
Yes.
with a house on it already.
Yes.
I think you can come back to us with an actual legitimate proposal, and we would look at that at that point. I don't think we have an overlay on that.
I think this is a little different scenario. So what he's referring to is along Marine. I know you guys are familiar. You guys have lived here longer than me. But there's single-family homes along that corridor. They're considered legal non-conforming. I'm not sure if we know when it was zoned C3, but it was decades ago, I imagine. And so the thought behind whoever was on commission or the council at the time was that they believed that Marine Avenue, they envisioned a commercial corridor. And so they zoned it C3. All these single-family homes there are what's considered legal non-conforming. Because if you continue to allow development of residential, you'll never see the commercial that the city envisioned, correct? So that's what I guess you recently purchased this house, but you didn't know that it was zone C3.
Yes.
So he's purchased a home there, and now he found out, yeah, it was a commercial zone. And so through our code, because it's legal non-conforming, you can't expand a non-conforming use. Otherwise, you would never see the vision that the city had. Staff has been having discussions, not about rezoning, but maybe allowing some sort of, I guess, and I don't want to say expansion, but some sort of leeway in these homes. Not necessarily you can turn it into a triplex or duplex or anything, well, you can, no, you can't, it's legal non-conforming, but to some extent make some improvements to the house, because right now we don't even allow that. And so staff is kind of toying around with that idea outside of this tonight, but staff is not recommending that we rezone the Marine Avenue commercial corridor.
And I believe this was an area that the EIR studied for not rezoning, but a housing overlay, HO3.
So it does have an HO3 on top
No,
of it?
this is a non-inventory site.
A
That was
non-inventory.
what was studied in the EIR, but as Amanda indicated, the staff recommendation was not to go with the actual project that was set forth in the EIR.
So we'll basically hear more about this at a later time, about the legal but non-conforming marine corridor between Crenshaw and Van Ness.
Yeah, I will say staff has been having some small discussions, and we'd like to see, we understand the predicament that this person may be in, and others, just wanting to make small improvements to existing home.
Sure.
But to increase the density that we're not required to do, we've already been mandated to increase density throughout the city, and to voluntarily do that is not what staff is recommending.
Okay, thank you.
Can I have Mala Patel followed by Steven Stepakis afterwards?
Good evening, Planning Commission members of the City of Gardena. I just want to start off by saying thank you guys for everything you do to keep our city a safe and attractive place to live and work. I'm here today to respectfully request that you consider rezoning our property located at 1350 West 139th Street from our split zone R1/R2 to R3. I was the only comment on the draft DIR, so I have a bunch of exhibits to it. I don't know if you have them. Hopefully you do. But essentially, my family's been operating our family business here in Gardena for over 40 years. We have about 50 employees, and our employees are the heart and soul of our business. But we find it increasingly difficult to retain and attract employees because housing is in such a limited shortage, and affordable housing is especially in such a limited shortage. So we own this lot, and it's a fairly large lot, and we would like to rezone it to R3 we will build on it and provide affordable housing to our employees. But some compelling reasons behind our request are, first, we clearly know California is in a housing shortage. The Regional Housing Need Assessment is making Gardena, the city of Gardena, have 50 additional 100 units. And so if we were able to rezone our lot to R3, we will build townhomes on it, around 7 to 8, additionally utilize the density bonus and provide affordable housing for low income and very low income, and then additionally utilize the ADUs to hopefully get about 10 to 11 units on it. And next, our lot is significantly underutilized, and it's an ideal R3 lot. I have once again, there's another exhibit with a plan view of the map and all of the properties are around it. But essentially, a lot of the properties around our lot are actually zoned medium or high residential. So our neighborhood directly west of our lot, 1360 West 139th Street, is an R3 lot with 14 units on it of a very similar size to ours. So clearly our lot is not being fully utilized to meet the community's housing need. Additionally, you can see Poinsettia Gardens and a number of other, the Poinsettia Gardens, the Azalea Circle, and then all on the east side of the block is all R3. So we're in an ideal spot for an R3 lot. Additionally, our lot size is around 19,200 square feet, and the minimum R3 lot size is 5,000 square feet. And we did a study. I took all of the R3 lots, and I took the average of them in the city of Gardena, and the average is around 0.3 acres. Ours is 0.44 acres. It's close to commercial, so adding more people there would boost the economic growth for the city, and additionally industrial. It's close to a lot of residential for housing opportunity for all those individuals that work in residential. We've built before, so we're dedicated to responsible construction practices, and we would truly appreciate if you would consider zoning our lot to R3. Actually, also in the exhibits is a layout of what we would do, and also a drawing of a plan of what we would also do. I'm sorry, I thought it would be in the, I apologize. I really thought it would be in the, I would have printed this in color if I knew. I'm so sorry.
Questions for you.
Yes.
The two lots that are to the west of you towards Normandy, go over that again as to what those are currently.
So the lot directly west of ours, which is 1360 West 139th Street, is an R3 lot. There's about 14 to 16 units on it already. the lots actually on the east side of the block, so you can't see it in this photo, but the east side, they're all R3. Ours is a really big lot. It's like of a very similar size to the one directly west of us. So it's pretty ideal. And then in the back of us, it's high density, right across the street, high density, to the left, high density. We're like a pretty ideal lot to be medium residential.
What's to the east of you?
East is, so it's like R1. You could see these are the 4 split zones, R1, R2 lots, and then it goes R1, R2, and then R3, R3, R3. It's on the, I should have printed it in color. I'm sorry. It probably would be a little difficult to see, but I outlined it in there so you can see all of the different kind of locations of the.
So you're part of the 5 units that we're looking at tonight.
As a split zone, yes.
So I brought up this this map, and so I'll explain a little bit more about this site. Just to be clear, the documents provided to the Planning Commission just now are part of the EIR that was prepared, and so these exhibits are in the report and made public record. But they identify this site, and as the speakers mentioned, for the request of a rezone to R3. In staff's presentation tonight, it's being brought up before you for under staff's recommendation under the sites that are split zoned in the residential areas for identifying the boundaries, right? So that's what was brought up to you tonight. But again, as part of the report and as part of the comments received tonight, the request is for the rezone to R3.
So, Commission, the rationale that staff took was that this is split zoned R1, R2. We looked at it. Definitely, we would not consider upzoning it to an R3, but we thought about making it all R2, the highest of the 2 densities, and to allow the development in that manner. However, as we looked at it, we would actually be doing them a disservice. They could actually develop more units if we were to identify the line so that they could develop that portion as R1 and then the other portion as R2. It's all because of these new state laws that the way it works out, that if we designate the split zone, it'll actually allow them to increase their density, but not so much as upzoning it to an R3 in that manner. So Normandy Avenue you see is R3, and that's a big arterial street, and that's kind of normal. But then you set back down to R1 and R2, and so the staff's position is that you identify that line, which would then give them the ability to develop both sides of that parcel under separate development standards, which would increase the potential for more units, but not so much as increasing density in your residential neighborhoods and upzoning it to an R3. So it's kind of a happy medium we took.
So what's the size of the existing building on the lot?
It's a small single family house, maybe like 1,200 to 1,700 square feet.
Okay.
Any questions?
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Presentation.
Next person is Steven Stepakis, followed by George Andrews afterwards.
Steve Stepakis, 271 St. Joseph, Long Beach, California. Amanda, could you pull up our lot at 1031 Magnolia, please? So we
Hang
have
on
a
a second.
split lot.
I'm going to ask that we do this one at the end because Commissioner Sherman has a conflict on 1031. So he will recuse himself at that point. So if we could get through all the other public comments, and then if I'm sorry, that way I don't have to have him leave, come back, then he can just leave. Just for this discussion, then he has to come back to deal with the rest of it.
Okay. George Andrews will be also at the end just because his comment is with the same address. But next, can I have Yun Sun Byun?
They may be speaking against it or something.
Hello, good evening. My name is Yoon Sun Byun. I am pastor of Korean Presbyterian Church of South Bay. My church address is 1444 Los Grants Avenue. So my church is 1.2 acre. My church is planned to rebuild the operable housing at the church site. And my church is the small build to the 1444 site. The church built it and the operable housing built it. Right now, I don't know, my church is joining. Last month, we joined the Zoom meeting, the LA Boys and my church and the city of Gardena. I don't know, somebody joined the Zoom meeting. And so my church is not indicate the zoning. Yeah, I don't know what zoning my church. And then today, the Gardena hearing the change the zoning. What zoning my church? I don't know. Yeah. And can we build the operable housing? Yeah, that's my question.
Do you know what
Commission,
zone?
yes, this is currently C3 with a mixed-use overlay, and it has the weird parking zone in the back. The staff recommendation is to leave it as the C3 mixed-use overlay, which would allow housing to be built on it and eliminate that parking zone. The EIR had studied it for C3 with an HO6 overlay, but the MUO does allow some housing to be built.
Basically, how many units do you think you would?
Yeah, the LA Boys is the nonprofit organization, built company the operable housing. He said maybe 120 unit, and another developer say the very small studio and one bed built the 276 unit.
That would not be allowed in the MUO.
Yeah, I don't know.
That would be a development.
There are different housing laws that he could speak with those housing groups about regarding church properties and commercial properties.
Isn't the church supposed to be a conditional use permit for?
If I don't know if this is legal non-conforming use or.
Yeah, the staff hasn't reviewed the entitlements for the property. You're correct, a church facility would require a conditional use permit. We don't know at this time whether the property that the speaker is mentioning does have that conditional use permit. But if they were to develop with housing, it would still be legal non-conforming if they didn't have a conditional use permit. If there was one, there may be a modification to it. But as Assistant City Attorney Kranitz mentioned, there are other state laws for housing on church properties. Mm-hmm.
Was this church identified in that original last year when we looked at different church properties where we could do housing on some of the parking? So
I think if they were licensed, we would have included them in our census. I don't know if this one was around when you guys went through that process or not.
So you could speak a little bit to it. So as Lisa mentioned, it was identified, what was it, H06, H05? There was a, yeah, but what Commissioner Langley is remembering is that during the housing element preparation and, for the adoption was to look at the potential for putting in its own overlay, its own religious overlay over sites to allow for different type of housing development aside from what has been developed under these housing overlays. All the sites, all the religious properties we're taking a look at. Ultimately, that was not moved forward with at that time. We just focused in on the housing overlays, those identified in the element for the new zoning designations. But as part of the housing element that was adopted, there was a program in there for the city to consider potentially putting its own religious overlay that could establish certain development standards for housing on religious properties. But there are, again, state laws that already implement that.
So Pastor, what I would recommend is that you come in and talk to Amanda and George, I'm sorry, about your situation as a church on Rosecrans, to find out more of your options at this point. But yeah.
I can connect with you after the meeting.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, please. All right. That's all? Yeah, thank you.
All right, and can I have Stevens Tepakis come up to the podium and then followed by George Andrews?
So at this time, we don't have any other speakers besides those looking to speak on the property at 1031 Magnolia Avenue.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask Commissioner Sherman to step down, and after, we'll hear the speakers from regarding 1031, after which I'll ask the remaining three to take a straw poll as to how they want to move on that one. And then that will be incorporated into the overall motion. Aye.
Should we whisper? So we're the owners of 1031 Magnolia. About 3 years ago, we brought a 6-unit project, townhome project, to the Planning Commission. And there was several issues because of the split zoning that it was recommended that we take it back and try to resolve some of the split zone issues with staff. We were told that in the future, that lot was probably going to be, the issues were going to be resolved because the lot was going to be rezoned multifamily, the whole lot. It's a unique lot in that it's split zoned and there is no access from an R1 street there. And there's no possibility of access because the homes in the R1 area are already developed. So you're asking us, if I understand it correctly, you want to leave the lot split zoned. You're not resolving any of those issues. And all you're doing is underlining that this is exactly where the zone is, R1 and R3. That's correct. Am I right, Amanda?
So as mentioned, the recommendation under the drafted ordinance is to identify the boundary. So to maintain the R1 zoning in the area identified here and the R3 zoning in the same spaces, but to identify that boundary where a portion of the property would be subject to the development standards of the R1 and the other portions to be then subject to the R3 standards.
Okay. So there's really no resolving of this split zoned issue. The same issues are going to plague us throughout this project. I really think you're missing an opportunity. I think the preferred planning practice would be to rezone it multifamily, and then if there will be issues with designing a project that's compatible with the neighboring R1 uses. That project that we bring to you could easily be properly conditioned to address any issues as to compatibility with the R1. But you're really handcuffing that project by you're going to have different setbacks, you're going to have different height requirements, you got different open space requirements. All these questions existed 3 years ago and didn't allow us to proceed. So I think you're really missing an opportunity. Any issues that arise for us bringing a project can be resolved simply by conditioning the project properly when we bring a new project to you. We've proposed 6 essentially detached townhomes. The rearmost townhome was completely detached. We also were the developers on the corner of Magnolia and Vermont, which was 10 detached townhomes there. That's the type of project we want to bring you, and I don't know why we're leaving it a split zone. All we're doing is underlining the problems that exist.
I think there was another speaker on this address. Let's hear from him, and then the commission can discuss this property.
All right, can I please have George Andrews come to the podium?
I don't have too much to add since this is my uncle and we're owners. But basically, just to highlight the R1 portion, because we don't have accessibility and you'd be driving past, other townhomes to your left as a driveway, it's really hard to, for example, keep a front yard setback where usually you see trees or landscape in a single family home area, but you'd instead probably see a driveway because that's where a garage would have to be. I just think it makes it difficult, even though, you may be able to add more units to the rear portion of the lot. I don't know if the parking would be able to dictate that and you'd be able to fit that many units back there. But what we originally had proposed in the back portion was to reduce the height of that building so there'd be less impact to the surrounding homes in that R1 area to try to mitigate any, concerns. And I think the height limit was 25 feet, and what we proposed was 27 and a half feet. So I don't know how the zone, designating the zone boundary really helps in this case, but I hope that we can somehow come to an agreement to build more homes in the city. Thank you.
And that is the end of the public comment.
So if the commission wishes to discuss this site, then we can bring Commissioner Sherman back in to discuss everything else and move forward.
So,
Yes, I'd like to know if you want to discuss this site specifically. Yes, no, if you just want to go with staff recommendation, then there's no additional discussion. Commissioner Sherman can come back. If you want to discuss this issue, then do so.
the question again, I guess at this point to staff is, when we vote on what's being proposed tonight on all the split units at that point and establishing, basically all we're doing is establishing the line between the R's at this point, we can bring it back up with a proposal later on and change the designation, or is this in concrete at this point?
I think in this particular parcel, it's kind of unique. You have single-family residential and adjacent to the single-family residential area, that zone. And he kind of hit it on the nail when he had mentioned that we want to keep the height equal to the R1s, which is 2 stories, right? Once you make it all R3, now they can go 3 stories, and we looked at it, well, is that fair to the R1s around? By delineating the line, he could then produce 2-story home on the R1 along with the ADU and the JDU and whatnot. And so again, we saw it as a benefit to at least identifying the line which would allow them to do that, and also rather than developing along the entire higher density.
So I don't have any other, I wouldn't want to continue the discussion, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, they just need to come back to the planning commission, then submit the plan, and then they can decide it.
I have nothing to say.
Kevin?
Bring him out of purgatory.
Mr. Chair, if there's no one else who wants to speak, then you could close the public hearing.
Okay. Public hearing. Okay, we can close the public hearing at this time. And does anyone want to make a motion?
I guess the question I have for staff is, and law and legal, is the reason we're doing this is to combine what was started in 2020 and combining it with what we've already done so that it's one unit?
When we started this, and then, you know, nobody expected the problems that we had with HCD, that it would take forever to get it done. So we ran up, as Amanda said, against the time frame where we were going to lose significant grant money. And HCD said, well, just get the result, just do it all, including your rezoning. And we said, we don't have the environmental, but, you know, and we'd indicate, well, we just started the environmental because we were looking at all these other non-inventory sites as well. The thought at that time, as Amanda indicated, before the Planning Commission, the City Council, was to add in additional sites for housing. So HCD, who really doesn't care about the CEQA procedure, just said, just go ahead and do it, and then they put a program in our housing element that said, and then do your environmental and come back with that. So looking at the inventory and the non-inventory sites. So that's what the CIR did, is we're kind of fulfilling the program that was within our housing element to examine everything. As staff report and staff has indicated, and Greg has indicated, I think from the time we started in 2020 to where we are in 2024, the states continued to adopt regulation and statute after statute after statute. And there's certainly, you know, maybe been a change in philosophy based on everything that's come on in the intervening years. So we can certify the EIR that studied all of these as being a legally adequate document. And then if somebody comes in with a later proposal, that can be the base document, so they don't have to go back to point 1 for environmental review, because we've covered 802 sites in addition to our housing inventory sites. So that's why we are where we are. So it is kind of combining everything, but the one thing it will do is now we will be putting mitigation measures that are in the mitigation monitoring and reporting program that would apply to the inventory sites as well as the non-inventory sites had they been included. Whereas before we did everything under an urgency without any CEQA review. So there was no mitigation whatsoever. Did I answer?
Yes, you did
Okay.
answer. The one thing I have at this point is, it's been bothering me for quite a while, and that is, we're being asked to add 1,500 homes and or
5,700.
5,725. I got that number down someplace. But we're not being asked to add 1 square foot of recreation or parks for the people that are coming in. And I'm your environmental impact study said, this is going to be an impact as to what's going on, and we're not doing anything about it. And my concern is, I think there should be more land put aside for parks and recreation in the city of Gardena when we're adding 5,725 residences, not including all the people at that point, because that's the only outlet people have. And I love it that, Johnson Park is right down the street from me, and I know that's a real community development for my neck of the woods. But I know that there's necks of the woods at Gardena, even though it's only 6 square miles plus, that don't have that. And there's no plan at all to provide something for parks.
Actually, you may not be aware, but the city council had directed staff, recreation, and I believe Public Works was a part of it also, to come up with a park master plan. They hired a consultant. They've been going through a lot of studies and analysis. And I want to say, is it the next meeting or fairly soon, they're going to be presenting a draft of this master park plan, where not only did they relook at our existing parklands and how to better utilize and update them, but I believe they also looked at potential new open space sites for other types of recreational facilities. So I think the city also has the same, city council also saw the same concern, initiated a study, and then I think we can update you guys when this is going back so that you can attend the meeting or watch the meeting and just be up to date on it.
I believe the master parks plan is going before tentatively to the city council next week, so the 25th. Is that the date? 7? Yeah. I believe is the final draft. What Greg also mentioned was that the recreation department's also preparing through another project, a inventory of their own for sites potentially for development of more parks. There are several plans and projects going on with through the recreation department involving those and staff can make the planning commission aware of those items as Greg has mentioned.
Thank you very much.
I would say one of the things is there's no 5,000 numbers right now. So in other words, there's nobody that's coming in right away. So I think your concern is a good idea, about having parks and so forth. But I don't think we're going to build 5,000 or we're even going to plan for 5,000 new sites and so forth. So anyway.
Correct. So the housing element you adopted allows for the city to accommodate those units, but it's up to the private industry and developers to develop it. So there's sites out there that were zoned to do and meet and fulfill this RHNA number that the state mandated down. And now it's up to the private market and industry to acquire those sites or current landowners develop them to those standards.
Right, and my comment, Steve, at this point is simply that while we plan that, you have to plan for Parks and Recreation, otherwise they get built on.
If no one has any other questions, we can make a motion.
Yep, just to clarify, tonight, the Planning Commission is making a recommendation to the City Council. These matters do not fall under the Planning Commission's jurisdiction to approve these amendments. But tonight, they're making a recommendation to how the City Council should vote on these items. And so the Planning Commission resolution that has been drafted for tonight by staff is resolution number PC 14-24, which recommends that the City Council adopt the resolution for certifying the EIR that has been prepared and presented tonight, adopt a resolution readopting those land use changes for the inventory sites and the amendments that were made to the land use plan, and to adopt an ordinance, ordinance number 1873, again, readopting the zoning changes that were identified in the housing element, the zoning amendment, text amendments that were done before, including the cleanups that were brought before you tonight and presented. This includes the removal for the parking split zone sites and identifying zoning boundaries between the residential split zone sites. So that's what the ordinance there is for. So that's what's under consideration tonight.
So I so move what she said.
Okay, so. You make the motion?
To adopt resolution PC 14-24. And all that Amanda said.
Second.
Commissioner Langley?
Yeah.
Vice Chair Reitscher?
Yes.
Commissioner Sherman?
Yes.
And Commissioner Khan?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
And for the benefit of the audience, as Amanda indicated, this goes before the City Council. Everybody who turned in a speaker slip will get notice of the hearing, but it's scheduled to go July 23rd to the City Council. And if you didn't turn in a speaker slip but want to receive notice, please give us your address and we'll make sure you're added.
And just as a reminder, we're currently on item number 7 for Community Development Director's Report.
Yeah, so I have 2 events to report on. Tomorrow actually is a new holiday, not only for the city of Gardena, but I believe it was made a federal holiday. It's Juneteenth, which is June 19th. The city will be celebrating from 4:30 to 8 p.m. At City Hall. They're going to have an evening of a picnic-style concert on the lawn to celebrate. They'll have some vendors, and the performance is by Corny Mims and the Know-It-Alls. So if you'd like to attend, starts at 4:30 to 8 p.m. Out here on the City Hall lawn. And then next we have on Saturday, June 20, this says 20, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, correct. Saturday, June 22nd at 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. over at Rowley Park. They'll have a show and shine car show. Well, they'll have some, I guess, some classic or cool type of cars, some food and music, and I guess attendees or people who want to participate register their vehicles, and then they're put on display. So if you're a car enthusiast, you can go ahead and spend your Saturday there. And that is all I have to report.
Planning and Environmental Quality Commissioners reports.
Commissioner Langley, no report.
Commissioner Sherman, no report.
Commissioner Khan, no report.
Commissioner Wright Chair, no report.
It's 8:45 and
8:45, meetings adjourned.
Thank you, George.